Record. There we go. So officially welcome to the Inclusion Conversation. It's really so nice to have you here and join us today. The Inclusion Conversation is a monthly talk show which I host, and it aims to break down borders and bring the world closer together, one conversation at a time. So this is our first conversation, and we're going to be joined by two very special guests. And before I welcome them, I just want to give a little bit of an overview about how the session is going to flow. And actually, before I do that, I better introduce myself. So hi, everybody. If you don't know me, my name is Solène. I am French, as you might have guessed already. I've been living abroad for pretty much half of my life now, and I fell in love with diversity and inclusion from meeting different people from different backgrounds, and that is what brought me to do a lot of writing and a lot of speaking, and I wanted to share a bit more of that, and especially highlight some of the amazing people that I've met along the way by talking about these different topics that really bring us together and connect us through our differences and also through our similarities. So a little bit more about today. How is the hour going to flow? We've really got three parts. So first, we're going to have a bit of a chat with Louisa and Olajide, our guests, who I will introduce shortly. I'm going to be asking them a few questions about the language of inclusion, which is our focus today. Then we'll have time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, if you think about them, as we are talking, please put them in the chat and we'll have a look at that and ask them. And then we'll switch off the recording. That first part will be shared on my YouTube channel and on my website, bbeyondborders.com. If you want to have a look, feel free. And then after that, it will be a conversation, just us, 24 of us at the moment, about the language of inclusion. And you'll be able to share your own personal stories and ask any questions that you might have. A little bit of inclusion conversation etiquette for the session. So like I said, the recording is on. You're welcome to have your cameras on or off. That is absolutely totally fine. There are subtitles available on Zoom. So if you click on that option, you'll be able to get the subtitles if that helps. I know that sometimes accents can be difficult, so feel free to use those. There's the chat enabled as well, so feel free to say, hey. It'd be lovely, by the way, if you want to start using it and say, hey, my name is, and I am in a certain place, certain country, so that we can get a sense of who is here. That would be really incredible. So go for it. There is no break scheduled in the session, but if you need a break, you don't have to raise your hand. This is not school, so all good. Just take a little break and please come back. So that's it for the etiquette. And now I'm so delighted to introduce you to our two amazing speakers who have joined us today. So we've got Olajide and Louisa. They're the founders of SISU, which is a consultancy in diversity, inclusion, and well-being. I met Olajide through a previous job. It feels like a previous life in many ways, and we connected instantly. So I'm so glad that him and Louisa, his co-founder, are joining us today, and we'll be sharing a little bit more about the language of inclusion. So if I can please invite you to introduce yourself first. And Olajide, because I met you first, I'm going to turn over to you if you'd like to say a few words about yourself.
Oh, I hadn't even thought about what I'm going to say. Hi, everyone. I am Olajide Alabi. I like to call myself an equality, equity, and inclusion disruptor. I am Nigerian, born and bred in the UK, but roots are Nigerian. I love talking about anything to do with equality, equity, inclusion, diversity. It really, really excites me. And it's what I'm really, really passionate about, which is what has led to setting up SISU, which is our equality, equity, and inclusion and well-being consultancy, along with my best friend and my business partner, Louisa, who we have created something that we are both so proud to call ours. and it's a business that goes out to talk to other businesses and trying to educate this path that we're all on. And it's about learning and unlearning, and it's about having uncomfortable conversations and being extremely brave. And it's what we love doing. And we also work with schools as well, and there's some really exciting things coming up for SISU. So yeah, please do watch this space and follow us and like and share and all that stuff that you have to do these days.
Sound like an influencer. Hello everybody. I'm Louisa. As you now know, I am the co-founder of SISU with Olajide. My background is actually fashion industry, so I have seen some very interesting and detailed situations pan out that I have not necessarily agreed with, and that was one of the key drivers to motivate me to want to build something that is going to be able to go into businesses and eliminate those kinds of situations. On top of that, I do have a very beautiful testing 6-year-old, Maisie, who is my other motivation within this business and this field, because when she grows up, I want the workplace to be an environment where she feels safe and accepted, and doesn't have to face some of the trials and tribulations that we have probably all faced within the working environment. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you both so much for joining and for introducing yourselves. And I think it's really fair to say that everyone in this space has a personal story that motivated them to get involved in diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So it's really humbling and inspiring to hear about yours. And now we're gonna start talking about language. And given your background, I think you'll have a lot to say about what I'm about to ask you. So first, we're gonna go to you, Olajide, and we're gonna start with the building blocks, really. What are we talking about when we talk about diversity, inclusion, and belonging?
Oh, wow, it's a big question. But I guess in a nutshell, I think diversity is any dimension that can be used to differentiate groups and people from one another. But in more detail, it's about it's about empowering people by respecting and appreciating what makes it, like, each one of us different. So that comes in all terms. So that we look at age, we can look at gender, we can look at ethnicity, religion, disability, sexual orientation, education, class, national origin. The list it can go on and on. Now these disparities are some of what form the 9 protected characteristics in the Equalities Act of 2010. And it's also very important to recognise that diversity encompasses differences in cognitive and emotional makeup as well. So, sorry, excuse me. Diversity allows for the exploration of these differences in a real safe and positive and nurturing environment. So it means kind of understanding one another basically, and surpassing simple tolerance to ensure people truly value their differences. So this allows us to embrace and to celebrate the rich dimensions of diversity contained within each individual, and place a positive value on diversity in the community and also in the workplace. Every individual within an organisation brings with them a diverse set of perspectives, work and life experiences, as well as religious and cultural differences. But the power of diversity can only be unleashed and its benefits reaped when we recognise these differences and learn to respect and value each other individually, regardless of the background. So that's diversity in a nutshell. And inclusion is a business effort, I think, or it's an effort as a society that we kind of need to all work towards and practice more, in which different groups of individuals having different backgrounds are culturally and socially accepted. They're welcomed, they're treated fairly, and they're seen as unique individuals. So inclusion is the sense of belonging, I think, in my eyes. And inclusive cultures make people feel respected, valued, seen, heard, for who they are as individuals, and as groups as well. So within an inclusive culture, people feel a level of, I guess, supportive energy and commitment from others so that they can reach their full potential. And inclusion often unveils a shift in mindset and in culture that has quite visible effects, such as, you know, feeling more included in a meeting, having more participation in a meeting, or how offices are physically organized and access to particular facilities or information. Inclusion is the foundation to attracting diversity and nurturing it, and belonging is the outcome. And I think in many respects, diversity is something that I think needs to kind of be put on the back burner whilst people focus more on the inclusion first.
Yeah, there's quite a debate around that, isn't there? Around, do you start with diversity? Do you start with inclusion? Do you tackle everything at once? It's tricky, right? You have to look at what's the initial situation that you're starting with. I really like to think about it like this, and I don't know if this will echo, and I'll ask Louisa a bit off the cuff question, unplanned question. I'd like to think about it as diversity is counting people, inclusion is making people count, and belonging is making people feel like they count. Does that resonate?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think that's one of the things that Olajide and I are trying to educate businesses on at the moment, is that the inclusion is the part that is going to unveil the diversity for you. And, you know, that will organically and naturally happen once you start including everybody and treating everybody as individuals. You will then automatically see that the diversity is there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much diversity that we don't see, right? That obviously is not visible to the naked eye. So that's a really great point. There's also the term, obviously, a lot of, you know, there's a lot out there about diversity and inclusion, and that we see EDI as like an acronym here and there. And the E can be equality, can be equity. So Louisa, what is the difference between equality and equity, and why does it matter?
So many times we've been confronted with people either telling us that we've spelt equality wrong when we're talking about equity, or asking us, what does equity have to do with EE&I, because they think we're about to discuss our finances. So yeah, this is an important question. And I think, first of all, it's also important to recognise that both the words do promote the act of being fair, of course, but even more so that we emphasise the difference in their meaning and the separate routes in which the words take to reach the end goal. So equality is treating everyone the same, giving everyone the exact same resources regardless of their needs, whereas equity is treating everybody differently and distributing the resources based on the needs of the recipients and the individual's unique circumstances. So equality is about dividing the resources in matching amounts, and then equity focuses more on dividing resources proportionally to achieve a fair outcome for everyone involved. Got a little example for you. So you've got a woman and a man, and both are viewed as being just as smart as each other and as capable as each other. And this would be an example of equality of the sexes. So then you've got said man and said woman, they've just filled the same role at an organisation, and they'll be provided with a starter pack. But the woman is visually impaired, so she requires a starter pack to be provided in Braille. So this is an example of equity. So they're both receiving the same resources, but one is slightly adapted for her individual needs. And, you know, it matters that we understand these definitions, because although I think they seem pretty sort of simple and straightforward, unfortunately, a lot of people and companies focus on equality because they see that as the fair way, when in reality, this can actually be more detrimental for people, because essentially it's putting, it's putting a plaster on any like sort of systemic issues within society or business. We all need different things. We all need support in different ways. We all learn in different ways. And so the focus needs to be on equity and creating custom tools which identify and address inequality.
Yeah, there's such a powerful image that illustrates that, isn't there, with the three different people trying to watch the baseball game, or maybe it's not baseball, I'm not sure what sport they're trying to watch, but one is much shorter than the other, and if you give them the same box to stand on, then one can't see anything and another one can see everything very easily. Whereas if you give them different height boxes, that's equity, then they can all see and enjoy the game. So yeah, I think it is a very important and significant nuance that is really useful to understand for sure. We're gonna talk about privilege now. We're getting like chills of discomfort usually when we pronounce that word out loud. It's true, a lot of people get uncomfortable when talking about privilege. How come, Olajide, and what do we mean by privilege, and how can we make people feel more comfortable around talking about it?
I always like to say that having privilege doesn't make you a bad person, or when someone says to you, you've got privilege, doesn't mean that you're bad. Like, I think that's the number one thing I think people should always remember. Becoming comfortable with the terms such as privilege and fragility is about learning what they actually mean. Once you understand what they mean, you can start to accept that you fall into a category of privilege, and you will own it, and then you will use it and help to aid those who do not have the same benefits as you. That is what the goal is. Privilege describes benefits that belong to people because they fit into a specific social group, or they have certain dimensions to their identity. So you can have or lack privilege because of your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your ability, your religion, your wealth, your class, among many other characteristics that we spoke about earlier when it comes to diversity. So having privilege means having an advantage that is out of your control, that you didn't ask for. You may not even notice it until you educate yourself about its existence. Privilege and the lack of privilege and how power is distributed is really one that I really would ask people to go and research. And I think there's the power privilege wheel. I've forgotten the name of the lady. Can anyone remember the name of the lady who did the power privilege wheel? Oh God, it's going to annoy me.
Sylvia.
Something. Yeah, Sylvia something or the other. She did the power privilege wheel, and it's such a great image in terms of understanding the distribution of power and privilege and how it balances out. So I would ask you to please, go and research Sylvia and the power and privilege wheel, because it really is quite a good way to understand it. But it's hard to acknowledge one's own privilege, because privilege is on the side of the oppression, which is why it gives people that negative, like, oh God, I don't want to talk about privilege, I'm not privileged, because it makes you feel slightly like, oh, am I the oppressor, am I the problem? And some people are really against talking about privilege because they don't want to be framed as the aggressor or complicit in a system that gives them an advantage at the expense of others. So other critics of the word privilege mistake it for a blanket term that suggests that if you have privilege, your whole life has been easy. And that's what, there's that connotation, isn't it? Is if you've said privilege, it's that, oh, everything's been handed to you, you've been born with a silver spoon. Ultimately, privilege is not a concept designed to make people feel guilty or to diminish their achievements. Instead, waking up to how you may have certain privileges is essential in terms of taking those first steps towards becoming or being able to decisively act in small and large ways to use your privilege and to make the systems we are born in to be fairer. We all have privilege, all of us. have an element of privilege in some shape or form. It's how we use that privilege or harness that privilege to benefit others who don't have those privileges. And I think that's what's really, really powerful when it comes to privilege, which is why I always say to people, just because you have privilege doesn't mean you're a bad person. What makes you a bad person is if you have the privilege and you do nothing if you do nothing with the privilege, and especially when you've identified the privilege that you have and then you do nothing,
Yeah, very true. I think what really shifted it for me was realizing that privilege is not necessarily even having something, is the absence of a barrier as well. And so you don't even realize, like you said, most of the time when you have privilege, because there's no barrier for you. So you don't hit the barrier and get reminded of, there's a blocker here. You just go about life, right? And it's realizing that that's not the case for everybody, and there are barriers everywhere. So yeah, that's really, really good, really helpful. Thank you so much for that. And Sean, thank you for sharing Sylvia Duckworth for the Wheel of Privilege. Thank you for that.
That's the one, Sylvia Duckworth, yeah.
It's really, really useful tool, and very interesting when you even think of yourself on the wheel and what that looks like. It's very good to put in perspective, for sure.
And I think,
go for it.
I was going to say, I think there's so much more work that needs to be done around understanding privilege as a society, because we don't talk about it enough, because we shy away from that awkward conversation about understanding privilege. But I think, I don't know what the answer is right now in terms of how we do it, but there definitely needs to be more conversations around our individual privilege, and also just being really grateful, I guess, as well, for the privilege and some of the people that don't have the privilege. I just think there's, I know I'm going to go off on a tangent. Sorry, I'll stop. Otherwise, I'll get on my soapbox and I'll start preaching.
All good. And Veronica is sharing as well that privilege can mean different things. If you're from a different country, living in a different country, and what privilege looks like can be different as well. And it's very true. I was listening to a book that most of us in the Western world live in the 10% most wealthy people in the world. So if you expand your horizon and think broader even than your own country or city, then you start to see that you have privilege in areas that maybe you didn't think you had privilege. It just kind of depends how broad and how far you look as well. So so many nuances there, and we're about to enter in our last definition, and then we'll talk more practically as well. By the way, if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat, and we'll get to that as well. But before that, so intersectionality is another one of these terms that is part of the language of inclusion, is part of that kind of dictionary and things that we want to set the scene with. So Louisa, what does intersectionality mean exactly, and can you explain it in a bit more simpler terms?
I think intersectionality gets viewed as quite complex because of the framework in which it refers to is so vast. But essentially intersectionality is just a framework that cross-examines our individual makeup to uncover where our disadvantages and our privileges are. So everything's connected. It's an acknowledgement that everybody has their own unique experiences of discrimination and oppression, and we should consider everything and anything that can marginalize people, which I think is why it's a topic or word that is avoided so much, especially within the workplace, because people start to think that they're opening a can of worms. But the actual definition of intersectionality is that it is the interconnected nature of social categorizations and privileges. Now, to echo what Olajide spoke about regarding our privileges, I think one thing we could all do better when it comes to viewing our privileges is to just remove the negative perception of them, as he said, so that the positive outcome of exploring intersectionality is that when we uncover our own intersectionalities, it gives us the ability to build and be allies. So, you know, everyone has the ability to be an ally because privilege is intersectional. White people can be actionable allies to people of colour. Men can be actionable allies to women and vice versa. Cis people can be allies to members of the LGBTQI+ community. Able-bodied people can be allies to those with disabilities, and, you know, economically privileged people can be allies to those who aren't. So, you know, the list is endless, obviously. I mean, if you take a look at the will from Sylvia, you can start to link those privileges and see where you can, you know, fulfill people's disadvantages. It's not an easy feat, and, you know, it can be quite daunting. But, you know, being an ally is not, it's not a silent job. An ally is a person or an organisation who stands up for others and proactively builds inclusion within the world that we live in. And, you know, this cross-examining your intersectionality is one of the tools in which will help you do that.
Yeah, intersectionality is really that crossroad, isn't it, between different characteristics that you might have. So you say if you're a woman and you have a disability, then you would be at the intersectionality, and your experience would be different from a typical woman, for example, or a woman of color. Those experiences would be different, and I think it's recognizing that. And it does get complex because we're all diverse individuals. We all have lots of elements that form the makeup of who we are, and therefore we might share characteristics with different groups at the same time. So yeah, thank you for shedding some light onto that, and talking about allies. I'm gonna tell an embarrassing story now, just for the fun of it, but he's on the call. This is a story about my dad. I had no idea I was going to say this, by the way, and it's recording, so it's great. But I remember at his retirement party, the CFO of the company, who is a woman, told a story that really, really, you know, had a big impact on her. They were at a board meeting. It was one of her first ones. She was quite new, and please forgive me if I'm saying not all the details of the story correctly. But essentially, a board member was sitting there, a man, older man, and I'm not blaming older men at all, please don't get me wrong, but this is just to set the scene. And he looked at her and he said, I'll have a coffee, please. Silence. My dad stood up and made a coffee and served the coffee to the board member. And that's, I think for me, that's allyship in practice. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to point fingers. You don't have to say, oh my God, that was such a sexist comment. Why you know, you don't have to do that. Sometimes you just need to do something, and the action will speak even louder than any words could have. So I just wanted to share this example. When you were talking about allyship, it's brought it to the front of my mind. So yeah, and I'm sure that you've all got examples, by the way. Feel free to share in the chat examples of when people have been, you know, allies to you, or you've been allies to others. We'd love to hear those in the next 30 minutes as well. And we'll kind of end on that for the formal parts with just one last question. One last question. So as an ally, you want to be an ally, you want to speak inclusively, you want to bring everybody together, right? This is all positive intent. It's really absolutely extraordinary. What happens if by accident you say something that's really offensive, that really upsets someone? What do you do then, Olajide?
I feel like you have to own your mistake, because at the end of the day, we are all humans trying to figure out our shit in this world. And, you know, no one is perfect. So I think the first thing to do is own the mistake, and then obviously apologize, and open the conversation up to learn, because I think, you know, something like that happens, situation like that happens, we're all here to learn. So ask more questions, dive in more, and get comfortable with potentially feeling uncomfortable. Oh, someone just wrote it there. Be ready to be uncomfortable. Get comfortable feeling uncomfortable, because I think that's just what's going to happen. And we all need to be more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And we all need to be a little bit more humble as well with it. I think just like, you know, when someone says, oh, you've offended me, it's not to get defensive, because our automatic response is always to defend ourselves and to be like, oh my God, you know, that's not how I meant it. Because then you start to fall into gaslighting, and, you know, it's just like, just calm
showing
yourself.
a little bit of humility.
Humility, yeah. Apologize, own it, ask questions, move on, and do better.
On the back of that, though, always you need to assess the situations as they arise, like, because, you know, there's some people, if you've really offended somebody and somebody's really angry, you know, you've got to assess the situation as it is. If that person is very upset, they might not want to be prodded and poked and asked questions, or you know, at that point, but it might be something that you can sort of park and return to at a later date.
We've got a question in the chat. What if that person still doesn't forgive you?
I don't think you're looking for forgiveness, are you?
No, I absolutely 100% agree. That's exactly what I was going to say, and I think that you got to be okay with it.
Yeah. I think you need to go into it not wanting. If you go into it not wanting forgiveness and in the mindset that I just want to learn so that I don't do it again, then I think that's a much better mindset than going in with trying to look for forgiveness, because, you know, you don't know what someone's going through that day. You don't know how many times that person has been attacked already that day. So you know, you can't control people's feelings. What is going on? Is that someone who's in my head?
What can I say? This is an amazing group of people. So already the conversation is flowing, and it's very true. I think if you lean in rather than leaning back and just to be like, hey, like, I realize that you're still upset. If and when you're ready, I'd love to learn more and make sure that I don't repeat this mistake, similar mistakes in the future. Just let me know, and just leaving that door open for that person to perhaps, you know, push it one day and reconnect. And yes, Veronica, maybe the person just needs time as well. So yeah, thank you so much for that question.
Just quickly wanted to say as well, if you flip it on the other side, in terms of if you're someone that's been offended by someone, you have to also use the same tools, because I think sometimes when you are, I mean, I know that I get offended regularly, and I have to sometimes be humble and bite my lip and also and rather than call someone out, call people in. When we've discussed this before, haven't we? It's all about, you know, educating. And as someone that is in this space, and I, you know, and with what I do and what we do, we have to teach people, we have to educate, and the only way to do that is by calling people in and explaining to them. So again, it's for the other side, it's again still being humble, taking the time, assess the situation, and educate.
Yes, so true. I absolutely love that nuance between calling out and calling in. There's such a different feeling when you're inviting someone in to learn, to explore, to exchange, rather than pointing the finger. So it's a lovely piece to end on, but we're not quite ending yet. Please stay with us. We are going to go off the record very soon and have just a candid chat with each other. Before we do that, for the purpose of those watching the recording, I will just be sharing one slide, and then I will stop the recording after that. So for those watching the recording, this is the end of the recorded part. Thank you so much for watching. You can find a lot of details about our upcoming events on Eventbrite. We've got an event on the 24th of February about LGBTIQA+ around stories and meaningful allyship. And then we've got a session on gender equality in March. What if it all started with a we, which I'm very excited about. You can follow us at Be Beyond Borders on Instagram and Facebook, and also sign up to the newsletter on bebeyondborders.com, and subscribe to the YouTube channel on Be Beyond Borders, where you can watch all of the episodes that will be coming up in the future as well. So for those watching the recording, this is the end of that part. Thank you so much for that.